tuning in to the Eggman Empire. Authorization approved. Access granted.
What's happening, sluts and incels? My name is KotyTang. Sonic Prime is one of the most well-received pieces of Sonic media out there, and for a good reason. It's got a great cast of voices, the animation is really well done, the story is fun, and there's a lot of references to all sorts of previous Sonic media. And the icing on the cake is that it's supposed to be entirely canon to the video games. So this story actually happened, or happens. The details of when and where this story takes place are muddy, but we'll get into that a bit later. Sonic Prime is a Netflix series created by a company called Man of Action, better known for their extremely popular Cartoon Network series Ben 10, as well as their hand in co-writing Disney XD's Ultimate Spider-Man and 2 Avengers shows, Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Avengers Assemble. They even have their much less critically acclaimed shows such as Generator Rex, Mega Man Fully Charged, and Zack Storm. Man of Action have played a hand in a large variety of media over the years, and not just television. With a team full of writers from all different walks, they should be more than capable of creating a show, to say the least. With Sega's track record of terrible writers for Sonic that they purposely choose to hire, it's nice to see some actual talent being brought into the mix. Something that I'm infinitely interested in is how to write and what goes into writing. So all of you lore fanatics and Sonic history buffs, welcome to the channel. I'm not going to be giving a play-by-play of events, but I'll be tackling everything Sonic Prime has offered us so far. So if you haven't seen the show, you're likely to get lost. But maybe you don't care, and you just want somebody to tell you if the show was any good. This video will do that too. Sonic Prime is a canonical story that ties into the video game franchise. Now I do have a video that discusses why Sonic Prime couldn't possibly fit into the canon, and I recommend you pause this video and return after watching that. Or don't, I don't really care what you do. I'll go over some of the things I've said in that video, as well as adding on more as we go on. To start, let's directly tackle the major thing. Sonic Prime is said by the director of the show that it is in fact canon. Now this isn't some goofy Sonic Boom is canon to itself, therefore it's canon nonsense. This is actual canon. Sonic Prime takes place in the video game timeline. The executive producer for Sonic Prime, Logan McPherson, has said
those particular ideas, but the show is canon, and it is based on the mythology that exists across the game. So, ensuring that we had done our research on that, and we worked very closely with Sega. They have been and are amazing collaborators on the series, and they were all over every detail.
When people first heard Sonic Prime was canon, it was a point of contention. Some people were looking at it as Logan saying Prime is canon to itself, and it's simply inspired by the canon of the games, much like the IDW series was. With further clarification from Ian Flynn, Sonic Prime does in fact take place inside the same canon for the games, and is a part of the ongoing series that has come along thanks to Frontiers.
As to where it fits on the timeline, I can't speak to it because that would spoil the show to a degree. So you're just going to have to wait till it's done. Towards the other point, I don't know how much I can say. So it's probably better that I not comment.
Alrighty.
I mean, that's a really dissatisfying answer. I know. I'm sorry, but my hands are kind of tied on that one.
Right.
So the question really becomes, when does Sonic Prime take place? I've seen some people place it closer to Sonic Adventure 2 or after Sonic Heroes, so let's address what's wrong with that, and you'll see just how close to the recent events this story will have to take place. The first thing, Shadow is in the show. So, correct, it has to be after Sonic Adventure 2.
He must be using the Chaos Emerald to warp.
My name is Shadow. I'm the world's ultimate life form. There's no time for games. Farewell.
Shadow, what is he?
But it can't be before Heroes, because Sonic and Shadow wouldn't have met yet.
What was with that hedgehog that looked like my twin?
It can't be before Shadow the Hedgehog, because Shadow didn't care about the world yet. It has to be at a point where Shadow has already decided he's his own person.
Goodbye forever, Shadow the Hedgehog.
So now, we're locked to after Shadow the Hedgehog, but then there's two characters that never existed until Sonic Colors, Orbot and Cubot. A prototype for Orbot may have existed in Sonic Unleashed, but that was SA-55, or Ergo as he's better known.
This is unacceptable!
Ergo, this is the repercussion of your hasty actions.
It wasn't until Sonic Colors that these two creations were finalized. With that said, any story that doesn't have both Orbot and Cubot yet would have already happened, meaning that all the way up to Sonic Freeriders, which takes place after Black Knight, but before Sonic Colors. Colors is only 4 games behind Frontiers in the canon. If it's before Colors, then Prime is a lot closer to Frontiers than you think. So we have 2 direct moments in the canon that Prime can take place. Either it's between Freeriders and Colors, or it's sometime between Sonic Generations and Sonic Frontiers. The only reason it has to take place after Generations and not after Colors is because Sonic Colors links directly into Sonic Generations. Eggman meets the Time Eater while he was floating through space after the events of Sonic Colors. However, I think we can point to this scene here in Sonic Prime, where it seems that both Orbot and Cubot don't even know what the Eggman Empire is yet.
The age of the Eggman Empire!
Ooh, catchy.
Thanks to this, I'm leaning more toward it taking place between Sonic Freeriders and Sonic Colors, as these two robots should already know what Eggman's goal is, unless they're very early in their lifespan. So there you have it. Sonic Prime is in the gap between Freeriders and Colors, or it's between Generations and Frontiers. But again, Orbot and Cubot don't seem to know what Eggman's Empire even is yet, so I'm sticking to it taking place before Sonic Colors. They even make it clear in Sonic Colors that it isn't the first time Orbot and Cubot have been in combat with Sonic. Either way, Sonic has already been through a ton of things at this point, dimension hopping included. We don't have an official era as the show hasn't been completed yet, but if it doesn't fit into one of these two ideas, then I don't know, Sega clearly doesn't understand their own franchise, which we already know that they don't anyway. Of course we have the final option, which is after Frontiers, but would you guys consider that a safe bet? We start off Sonic Prime in Green Hill, a place that everybody considers their home.
Home is where your friends are, as they say. And that's Green Hill. We're the best.
The characters have never lived there before, but the show sure thinks they do. We have all the Green Hill denizens here. You know, Sonic, Tails, Amy, Knuckles, Big, Rouge, and even Shadow, just as it's always been. Their time here is cut short by Eggman discovering and attempting to take control of the Paradox Prism. The classic team of Sonic are here to stop him. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Rouge. Sonic attacks the prism, causing a massive explosion that pulls in everybody around Green Hill and into the new dimension of New York City and subsequent other dimensions, finally discovering that the original Green Hill is gone for good.
Home? Home doesn't exist anymore because of you!
Prime has a small cast of characters to work with, and instead of expanding the cast to multiple characters, it expands to multiple versions of the same character, each with their own personalities to deal with, and eventually these dimensions collide, as Sonic races to try and collect the broken pieces of the Paradox Prism across dimensions, while attempting to thwart the Chaos Council, a villainous league consisting of 5 versions of Eggman.
Looks like an Eggman family reunion.
We are not a family, rodent. We are the council.
The premise is good. Interdimensional travel is much more manageable than time traveling. which is one of the worst ways to tell a story. As we dive into how exactly Man of Action chose to tell the story, we're going to start seeing all of the cracks and problems that the creators of Sonic Prime have crafted for themselves. What Sonic Prime does right is characterization, and it would have to, considering that each different version of a character needs to be distinctly different from the previous versions. Almost every character is divided into 4 different versions of themselves, with the first being removed entirely and their whereabouts are unknown, if they even exist anymore. Seeing what a character used to be and then seeing essentially what they've become is a nice addition to the plot as we follow Sonic discovering how the new dimensions work. Something Prime doesn't get correct is Sonic. Sonic is extremely stupid, like impossibly stupid. He takes forever to realize he's in another dimension, and then when being so obviously transported to a different dimension, he still thinks he's in the one before, even though he literally just discovered that he was dimension traveling now, not even 2 minutes before he gets warped. Sonic at this point has been through dimensions or seen somebody jump through dimensions at least 4 times. Sonic Rush Adventure, Sonic and the Secret Rings, and Sonic and the Black Knight. Sonic has also traveled through different timelines twice. Sonic CD and Sonic Generations. He did so in 06 as well, but the events were reset, so technically he didn't. But regardless, Sonic should be no stranger to what's going on around him, but Sonic is reduced to a cartoon character even more than he was in Sonic Colors. But at least he's more animated and his jokes can actually be pretty funny at times. Although Prime Sonic may have genuine moments and times where he is serious, the majority of his character is exactly what you get in the Sonic movie. They have the same humor and their personalities are parallel to each other. The only difference is that Prime Sonic is a cartoon rather than a realistic anthropomorphic hedgehog. So the way that he moves and acts things out is closer to a Looney Tunes cartoon. The real Sonic is a witty, laid-back person with an attitude, and the majority of the time, Sonic is pretty quick to understand the severity of something. He's really good at reading the room, basically, and his jokes are well-placed and not too frequent, rather than just constantly spurting out whatever he thinks would be a funny one-liner or catchy phrase. Prime Sonic lacks all of the tact that the real Sonic has. He lacks his street smart, his intelligence, he acts like a literal child hyped up on a sugar rush, and he's oblivious to damn near everything that's happening around him. So much so that he ignores Tails' warning to not keep attacking Eggman's robot, and he ignores the entire cast telling him to keep away from the Paradox Prism. If Sonic has ever been anything, he has never been stupid. He may be quick to act on impulse at times, but that's generally when it comes to saving someone or something. The real Sonic is way more clever and way more careful than some people give him credit for. The real Sonic is actually wise well beyond his years, constantly giving life advice to people he's only just met. Life advice that steers their lives in entirely better directions that they never would have reached without Sonic's intervention. If everybody was shouting at Sonic to stop and wait, he wouldn't just keep going for no reason. This Sonic is no different than Boom Sonic, but instead of emphasizing Sonic's worst traits, Sonic Prime emphasizes Sonic's best traits, making them both false impersonations of who the real Sonic actually is. We'll dive deeper into why Sonic is acting like a complete moron later on when we discuss the theme, as it ties directly into what the story is trying to say about Sonic, and it gets this aspect of him entirely wrong in its attempt.
Sonic, you don't know what the prism is capable of. Be careful, be careful, be careful.
Devin Mack is by far the best Sonic voice we've had in over 20 years though, and he's a fantastic actor, so at least there's that. Sonic isn't the only character that's showered in animation quality. The show looks great, but not just the characters, the environments. The environmental quality takes a dip during some moments in the 2 jungle episodes, but everything else is still done so well that you'll forget about this hideous tree that was just a stretched out texture on several elongated cylinders. There's really not much to hate on when it comes to the visual aspects of the scenes in the show, and Man of Action proves that they're more than capable when given the resources for the visual aspect. Sonic Prime brings in many aspects from the video games and utilizes them in the show, but the major thing that really bugs me is that they've brought in the rings and the way that they present the flickies. Flickies may have been what Eggman used to power all of his machines, but Eggman rarely uses them for his badniks. The last time Eggman used the flickies was in Sonic Lost World, which was 3 canon games ago. And before that was Sonic Rush, which was a whopping 15 canon games ago. That's an enormous gap of Eggman not powering his robot army with flickies. Sonic says,
Robots without flickies? Now that's new.
And there's no reason that Sonic would ever even question this fact. It should be nothing new to him or anybody else in the show. And if we're going by the fact that this game takes place between Sonic Colors and Free Riders, then it's been 9 canon games since Eggman used flickies in his army. So no matter how you split it, this shouldn't be a crazy thing. And if that doesn't annoy you, this certainly should. The next thing is the rings. Now, sure, if it was just a one-off gag, whatever, a little funny fourth wall breaking joke, no harm there. But then the characters began interacting with and full-on referencing the rings. Again?
Not used to all these walls. And where are my rings? But first, just in case Eggman gets in a lucky shot, rings!
And again.
You literally shook the world!
That's cause I'm good! And powerful, apparently.
And again.
Where's Sonic? How long does it take to collect rings?
Hate to hit and run, but I got a split, Shadow!
To the point that this was clearly not a fourth wall breaking joke. This was supposed to be something they're actually trying to push as part of the canon. Sonic is just invincible when he has rings, which is simply not true. To understand how storytelling works in video games, you have to first understand that things that happen exclusively in gameplay are not actually happening in the story. Sonic doesn't actually pick up rings as he runs around the world. He doesn't find capsules of extra lives, invincibility, or shields that somebody has stashed away in the levels. Sonic doesn't get a checkpoint and then just spawn back there if he dies. There's an extremely harsh difference between writing and gameplay. When fighting a boss, yes, Sonic does defeat that boss, but the specifics of how he beat them are left up to interpretation. This goes for every single video game out there. Just because you can make a character do something doesn't mean it happened that way. Sonic doesn't spin dash at Eggman and then jump on his head a couple times to defeat him. That's just gameplay. Sonic definitely defeated Gun's Bigfoot in Sonic Adventure 2, but he didn't stun lock him and attack until he started blowing up. Sonic uses rings to take a hit in gameplay, but Sonic doesn't go to fight Chaos and be like, "Oh shoot, I forgot my rings, I better go get some." If gameplay mechanics actually existed inside the story, when Mephiles literally kills Sonic in 06, he would have just respawned at the nearest checkpoint. Or, at the very least, a bunch of rings would have popped out of his body and he'd scurry around as he picks up the rings he lost in order to fight Mephiles. Just because it happens in gameplay does not mean that it actually happens in the story. There are exceptions to this rule, but that's best left to another video entirely. All you need to understand is that rings aren't just scattered around the world waiting for somebody to collect them, and they for sure don't exist the way they are presented in Sonic Prime, and never have. That's purely gameplay. To even present this as an idea opens up some of the largest plot holes in this entire franchise.
Chaos control!
There are various other elements that are just harmless references to things the characters have been confirmed to do, or just canon in general. And it is nice to see nods to the series and various Easter eggs littered throughout. If this weren't being presented as a canon piece of Sonic lore, then I wouldn't care what they did really. I would just be judging their interpretation of Sonic, but because it's canon, I'm judging it as though it is. There are a lot of things that are just very odd about this show when it comes to canon. Of course, the obvious one is that everybody appears to live in Green Hill Zone. If they don't live there, are we supposed to treat Green Hill like some sort of national park that everybody spends all of their free time around? And they don't have jobs, so that's always their free time, is to be in Green Hill Zone. It's really lucky for them that Eggman just decides to mess with Green Hill Zone all the time, even though he's all over the world doing stuff. How do they even catch him doing anything else if they're always in Green Hill Zone? How does that even work? And then, of course, there's Knuckles, who has absolutely no reason to even be there. Sure, in Frontiers, Knuckles said that he plans to be able to go where he wants, when he wants, and not spend all his time stuck in Angel Island.
I'll admit, I do envy your lifestyle. Freedom to go where you want, when you want.
So do it. Get out there and live a little.
Maybe I could.
So let's explore that idea, starting with the largest problem of that statement, and that's when this story takes place. If at any point this takes place before Sonic Frontiers, that becomes entirely invalid. That means that Knuckles never said that, or even considered that yet. If it takes place after Frontiers, is Knuckles really just leaving his emerald completely unattended for hours, maybe even days at a time, with no intention to even go and check on it? Is that just Knuckles' character now? Screw the Master Emerald, I want to lounge on a beach? Does that sound consistent with who Knuckles even is? To be fair, Knuckles has never been consistent. But if the plan is to make him consistent now, this is a terrible start to that, isn't it? Why doesn't everybody, I don't know, hang out on Angel Island? It's just as varied as South Island. If they really want to see Knuckles, it's a pretty dick move to force him to go out of his way for them when they're the ones with all the freedom. And then we get to the dimensions. While in the other dimensions, everybody is a completely different character than who they were before, with different upbringings and lifestyles, New York City is a direct one-to-one comparison to Green Hill Zone, right down to the character backstories. There are only two key differences between the timelines. Sonic doesn't exist, and Eggman has 4 human partners. So if this is a direct one-to-one comparison dimension with those two caveats, why is Green Hill the only place that exists? What about the rest of South Island? Where's West Side Island? Tails was originally born and raised in West Side Island until he met Sonic. What events caused him and his bullies to magically appear in New York City? There's a huge distance between South and West Side Island. How did they even get there? Why is Rouge just relaxing in Green Hill Zone? She should be working as a spy or chasing treasure. In the Resistance, she clearly has a ton of espionage skills. Where did she get all that from if she's not a spy? Why is Knuckles not guarding the Master Emerald? The only thing that I can come up with is that it's not a one-to-one recreation of the original dimension, and this is in fact just a pocket of the universe where only Green Hill exists. There is no Angel Island. Rouge isn't a spy. There are no humans besides somehow the 5 versions of Eggman. There are no emeralds, and so on and so on. The only thing that does exist in this dimension is Green Hill Zone. Hell, there might as well not even be space or even a sea. It's just this city, and that's it in this dimension, because that's how they wrote it. The other dimensions aren't a one-to-one recreation. They're only based off of Green Hill, but the characters are so different that it doesn't matter what else is out there. It doesn't matter if there are Chaos Emeralds. Knuckles is a pirate in this dimension. It doesn't matter if there are humans living in a city far away. Rouge is a tribesman in the jungle. But with New York, everybody is supposed to have had the same upbringing and backstories, but the only difference is that Sonic was never around to stop Eggman, so his army went completely unimpeded to the point that he could take over South Island in one swoop. New York City makes literally no sense as a dimension. Are you saying All the dimensions still have the same backstories and upbringings? Okay, then where are Tails' bullies in the pirate dimension? Green Hill would have been completely submerged underwater and called no place when he was growing up. So how is Tails okay if he would have been extremely young under the water in Green Hill Zone? He had to come from somewhere, right? Well, it's the same backstory, so according to New York, he sure as hell wasn't in West Side Island. If Green Hill Zone is a jungle like in Boss Cage Maze, where are his bullies there too? Why did this ragtag group accept Tails' freaky double tails but nobody else did? The answer is that nobody has the same backstory. Only New York has the same backstories. And that is why New York makes no sense as a dimension. It cannot have the same plot as what originally happened. It's missing out on every vital detail about every single character, but somehow it's acting like they're still there. How can every vital detail about a character still be there if everything is actually different? When it comes to the actual writing of each dimension, of course New York has the most contrived existence. However, it also has the best plotline of all the other dimensions. And that's because New York is the actual story of Sonic Prime. New York is basically the hub of everything. It has the actual villains of the show, and it's where Sonic begins his journey. So we spend the most amount of time there, even returning to it after Boss Cage Maze to continue the plot. I say continue the plot because the only time the plot advances in part 1 is when New York is involved. Every single thing from the premise to the way the world works is set up in New York. Everything else is just an extra add-on. When Sonic enters Boss Cage Maze, he has to fix a spat between friends, and the resolution is just, why didn't you guys just say sorry? And that's literally it. Nothing important happens there at all. Everything that happens in there we already knew. We learn that Sonic is jumping through dimensions in New York City. We learn that the Paradox Prism directly influences the world in New York City. We learned that Sonic needs to collect these prism shards, but he's unable to physically touch them in New York City. This is why Boss Cage Maze looks so different from New York City, because the intention was to make you believe that it's not dimension hopping. We are literally just changing how Green Hill Zone worked, and that's what Sonic thought. But 9 literally says that he has no idea who Sonic is. He grew up completely without him. Eggman doesn't even know who Sonic is. We already learned that Sonic is in a different dimension. We are not confused about the timeline switching. That's not what we're thinking. Boss Cage Maze only does 2 things for the story. We learn that there are other dimensions that are vastly different from New York City, and we learn that Sonic's shoes modified the dimension that he's in. But again, when we return to New York City, we learn there are other dimensions, and we learn that Sonic's shoes change in those dimensions. It solidifies both these ideas when 9 takes Sonic to a different dimension called the Grim. It shows his shoes, and 9 is like, hey, there's a ton of other dimensions out there. Check out this one. Oh, your shoes are changing here. Wow, that's crazy. Every single piece of story we learn while we're dealing with New York City. Boss Cage Maze was literally nothing but filler. It was inconsequential and didn't matter at all to the plot. I don't often say that something a writer wrote needs to be removed. I actually recommend reworking it into the plot instead. The ideas are there. Writers just sometimes forget that they have a story that they're writing for, and it needs to always be advancing. Everything must lead to something significant. I'll get back to the purpose of the jungle dimension later on. Thematically, it works. Narratively, it needs to be completely reworked. And that's the next major problem with this show. The pacing freaking sucks. We have this compelling and engaging plotline with Green Hill Zone in New York City that lasts 3 episodes, and then we trade it to go to the jungle to go screw around. When Sonic returns, for some reason everybody in New York says that he's been gone for weeks, and now everybody is mad at him for abandoning them. Then, in the middle of a literal war with the Chaos Council, 9 swoops Sonic up so that the audience can be delivered exposition on how the Paradox Prism works. 9 literally takes Sonic through dimensions and explains what shatter spaces are. Mind you, there's a literal war going on and we just put that on hold so Sonic can be told what a shatter space is. 9 takes Sonic to an entirely new dimension. The dimension that 9 sends Sonic to is named the Grim, a barren planet floating in space. Now, I do have a feeling that it has something to do with the actual Green Hill Zone that was destroyed by Sonic, but remember, there's a literal war going on, so eventually 9 has to take Sonic back to New York, and they weren't gone for a couple of minutes. These two were gone for quite a while. Sonic even recounts his entire adventure up to that point to 9 before they even head to the Grim, and then they have another conversation about what to even do with the planet. Then the conversation turns into Sonic asking 9 to return with him, and he fails to convince him in doing that, so 9 just throws him back. Remember how when Sonic left Boss Cage Maze and it was said he'd been gone for weeks when it's only been 3 or 4 days at most? Okay, so did time completely halt while 9 was taking Sonic to the Grim? Because when Sonic gets back to New York, they're at almost the exact same moment that they left. Time links up with how long they'd actually been gone now. And then, when 9 does come back after spending the rest of the episode in the Grim, he somehow returns as though time continued to pass the same? And then Sonic is thrown into another dimension and now we deal with the pirates, and finally, after the entirety of part 1, New York decides to travel to another dimension, and then the show ends right as it starts picking up pace. And now we're at the actual problem with Sonic Prime. They start the story entirely wrong. They started at point 0 of their story. When you write a story, you don't start at point 0, you start moments before the story begins. The story of Sonic Prime doesn't begin until episode 8, because that's when the dimensions are actually in peril. New York City has broken through shatter space and are now becoming an interdimensional threat. How about another story as an example? In Finding Nemo, it starts when Nemo is a baby, and then it advances to the very day that he gets taken by the humans. Of course, there are plenty of exceptions to this rule, as there are always exceptions, and extremely well-practiced and studied writers know how to bend those rules. But the people at Man of Action, as professional as they may be, are not the stellar writers who are capable of bending these rules. Something significant has to be happening within the first 5 chapters of your story if it's a book, and if it's a TV show, the story needs to begin after episode 3 at most. After episode 3 in Sonic Prime, the story literally pauses so Sonic can go meet the Jungle Crew in Boss Cage Maze. Sonic now has to restart his adventure and relearn everything we already discovered in New York. The problem isn't that Sonic goes to the jungle. As I said, the problem is that Prime starts at absolute 0. They have to set up everything. And of course, every story has a level of setup as the viewer generally is learning everything about the world that you're creating. Sonic Prime has to create an entire world and create the major conflict within 3 episodes. They failed to do this because after episode 3 they do a full reset and now we're brought to Boss Cage Maze. They already set up the majority of everything in episode 1, and that's how you're supposed to do it. They have Green Hill, they have New York City, they have the premise, the characters, the villain. Everything is set up in episode 1. It's an hour long. They already set this whole world up and created the conflict. The reason that going to Boss Cage Maze the way they did was such a massive mistake is because episode 4 and 5 have absolutely nothing to do with the main plot, which is Eggman and the characters in New York City. They didn't continue the conflict like having Dr. Deep and some of the badniks, even 9, who was right next to Sonic, transported to the Boss Cage Maze. This was an enormous mistake. We as the viewer have just been forcefully ripped out of the story that we were building, and now we're meeting an entirely new cast of characters with a separate conflict from the story that we were just building. And we're going to be solving that within an hour, and then we return to New York to continue the story where we left off. It is literally filler. The entire setup for Prime is completely broken. The story doesn't actually start until the final episode, where Rusty Rose appears in no place and she starts making moves, and then she immediately loses and part 1 just ends. The fix for Sonic Prime is beyond simple, and I have no idea why they wouldn't start their story like this, especially one that's limited to 23 minutes an episode. The Chaos Council should have already been terrorizing every dimension. As it is, every single villain is locked to New York City. When Sonic goes to a new dimension, there are no villains. Everybody is on the hero side. Just because Thorn Rose was presented as the villain in the Jungle episodes doesn't mean that she was evil. She was the antagonist for sure, but antagonist doesn't mean evil, and she wasn't evil at any point. The group of characters were friends, and their conflict was literally solved by just apologizing. I'm gonna show you how easy of a fix this is, and why I strongly believe that these guys didn't plan the beginning of the story out properly. So what do we know about the Jungle game? Well, Prim and her friends don't really care much for the jungle at all. They outright disrespect it in order to get what they want. Thorn Rose loves and genuinely cares for the jungle. What character do we know that has absolutely no respect for nature? Dr. Eggman, right? And how many versions of Eggman do we have to choose from? 5. Some of these 5 versions of Eggman should be scattered throughout each dimension while reporting back to Mr. Dr. Eggman. This is actually what starts to happen in episode 8, but this already should have been what's been happening from episode 1. If an Eggman was abusing the resources of the jungle, you could either straight up have Prim and her gang joining Eggman in order to have security in where they live and be able to eat because they don't care about the jungle, or you could even just play off the resistance plot again and have the jungle crew trying to fight back against Eggman, and then Sonic arrives. This is an inverse of what New York presented with the evil Amy. It's a very simple premise, and it keeps the plot moving along as Sonic now faces one of the alternate versions of Eggman who is abusing the paradox prism of this world and reports back to New York City. And that's how he's getting all these resources and ability to take control over the dimension. That's literally it. That's all Sonic Prime needs to do to fix the narrative. The Chaos Council should be causing chaos throughout each dimension already, and Sonic is the character that is able to figure out what's going on, since when he touches the paradox prism, he gets teleported. 9 later discovers that the prism can be used to hop dimensions, which would be him figuring out how the Chaos Council are doing it. Sonic's goal is now to battle each different Eggman in each dimension. The story will always be progressing, and the conflict always matches with New York, even morphing into the New York Resistance being able to jump to different dimensions themselves and help out these other dimensions. It literally becomes a dimension-wide battle that way. I said that thematically, the boss cage maze works. When talking about themes in a story, if you're not a writer, you just boil it down to a subject. So in Sonic Prime, it's friendship, trust, forgiveness, etc., right? There's nothing wrong with that. You're not expected to really understand how themes work. Well, we're going to look at themes properly. Themes aren't subjects, they're a specific message. Have you ever heard somebody ask, what's the moral of the story? That's what the theme is. Theme is something that the writer wants you to take away from the story that they're telling. A theme is not friendship. That's a tool, a subject that works toward creating the theme. See, themes aren't vague, they're actually phrases. Usually they're not directly said in the story. You take the idea that the movie is presenting and you put it into words. That's how you find the theme. Here's a few themes you might have heard before. There's no honor among thieves. In a story where that's the theme, the thieves will constantly be betraying and or lying to each other, whether they're robbing a bank and one guy takes all the money in the end or whatever. With great power comes great responsibility. That's Spider-Man. It's about having the ability to do something and knowing what it costs or what it means to use it. You'll find no truer love than your family. That's Frozen. The only way Anna could be saved from being an ice statue was not from who Anna thought was her lover, but her sister. Those are themes. It's everything that happens in a story all the way until the end, and you create a message from it. You wouldn't watch Frozen and be like, the theme is family and love. Well, what about family? What about love? Those are topics. Spider-Man is about power. That could mean literally anything. What does the movie say about power? You don't have to agree with themes either. It's all based on your own view on the idea itself. You could come from a horrible family and not believe Frozen's theme at all. You could be the richest man in the world and just throw your money around with no consequence, and Spider-Man's theme wouldn't apply to you. Themes are subjective, but it's generally what the writer believes or wants you to walk away with after the story ends. Also, most writers will never tell you what their theme was, especially over fear of them completely botching on their own theme and majority getting something else from it. There are also a lot of writers that just let the story craft a theme for them, and there's nothing wrong with that either. A story doesn't need a set theme to exist, it just helps the writer get a better handle on its structure and gives the story more meaning. So, applying this to Sonic Prime, themes can usually be spotted by looking at the protagonist's views or actions early on. The earliest thing that we notice about Sonic is that he doesn't listen to his friends, and he's very impulsive to the point of recklessness. He didn't listen to Tails telling him that he was fighting a trap, and he didn't listen to anybody telling him not to attack the Paradox Prism. Even when fighting Shadow, Shadow is showing genuine concern and interest in what's going on, but Sonic refuses to even bother letting him in. 9 insists that he's not Tails, but Sonic would rather tell him how much they actually do know each other. Are you seeing a pattern here? I'm sure you've actually picked up on a bunch of other things Sonic does yourself, but the major takeaway is that Sonic doesn't listen to his friends. The way they did this theme also makes Sonic act completely out of character, so it's already bad writing. So we bring in the boss cage maze, and what's the problem? Well, the Jungle Gang are being overzealous with the resources from the jungle, and Thorn Rose doesn't like that. But the Jungle Gang doesn't care, so Sonic has to force these characters to see eye to eye by understanding each other. Instead of Thorn saying how she felt, she just started attacking the Jungle Crew. This keeps going on into no place. Captain Dread's crew want to be pirates, but Dread is preventing them from doing so. The crew wants Sonic to become their captain, and after fighting off pirates, now Sonic is directing them to the Paradox Prism. That's where Dread brings back his piracy days and the crew are happy again. So what do you think the theme of Sonic Prime is so far? Without a resolution to the entire story, we don't have a full grasp on the theme, so this is just speculation until the very end of Prime. If you said something along the lines of, listen to your friends or consider other people's feelings, then you're right, you're understanding the theme. There's a lot more that goes into the theme, but the major theme almost always deals directly with the actions of the protagonist and how they solve problems. So just pay attention to how Sonic starts the story and how he's responding to the inner conflicts of people and himself. We need the ending of Sonic Prime to actually understand the full theme, but that's what my best speculation of it is right now. So yeah, thematically Boss Cage Maze work, but you need to be able to tie the theme in with the plot. Nothing in a story should be exclusive. Everything has to happen in the moments of the narrative or directly lead into the narrative. I'm sure everybody has heard, if it doesn't advance the plot, then cut it. I believe that if it doesn't advance the plot, then rewrite it, but the only thing that links back to the main plot in the jungle is that Sonic gets to the Paradox Prism. That's it. Nothing else has anything to do with the actual story. New York is the actual story. So anytime we go away from those characters and those conflicts, we're essentially writing a different story, which is why the Boss Cage Maze is considered filler. Thematically it works, but it doesn't work in advancing the plot. Never halt your story. New York should already have had a hand in each dimension. The fact that Sonic and 9 find a dimension where New York has no pool should be a major revelation. A place that Eggman cannot touch them and people will be safe. A place they need to keep secret. Sonic Prime is paced horribly. The story doesn't even start until episode 8, and the first 7 episodes are all set up, and the first episode is an hour long. That's 4.5 hours of just setting up some sort of cohesive narrative. And then they bog it down in the middle by trying to tackle 2 completely separate stories. Part 1 of Sonic Prime fails to set up the premise at an acceptable pace. However, it's still an easy watch as the characters are all extremely likable, and it's nice to see somebody that actually seems to care about Sonic laying their hands on the franchise. I'm hoping that part 2 will be a lot more enjoyable. With Shadow in the limbo of Shatter Space, will Sonic be able to bring him into the other dimensions? Does Shadow still have his Chaos Emerald? Will that affect the plot? The Chaos Council are also finally able to become a true interdimensional threat. Even though Rusty Rose was immediately defeated upon her initial entry, hopefully the power of the Chaos Council will start showing as they send more and more of their firepower to the other dimensions. I want to see more of the Grimm as well, and I'm still wondering what happened to the real Tails, Amy, Rouge, and Knuckles. I still enjoyed Sonic Prime as it was a fun watch, but I was falling off so hard after the Jungle episodes, and honestly I wasn't interested in continuing the show until Rusty Rose appeared in No Place at the cliffhanger of episode 7. I nearly fell off from the show because of the detour they took in the Boss Cage maze, and it genuinely felt like they didn't know what to do with the story watching that, and the first time we got to No Place, I was concerned that they would just be repeating that same problem. Let's hope that part 2 heavily picks up the pace and we remain on track the entire time. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and comment your thoughts below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Sonic content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.